customs and languages frequently suppressed, and their rights as citizens denied or restricted. Despite the establishment of the Commonwealth of Australia in 1901, many pieces of state and federal legislation still marginalized and discriminated against Aboriginal people. But the 60s and 70s brought about a major change, partly inspired by the civil rights movements in the United States and a global decolonization. Aboriginal activists and their allies started calling for justice and equality. The other critical issue that gained prominence at this time was that of stolen children, Indigenous minors who were forcibly removed from their families and communities, then put under the care of white institutions or families.
Oh, no, Australia.
Guaranteeing their survival despite some of the planet's most challenging conditions. However, Europeans brought with them winds of change and a burgeoning appetite for exploration.
Oh, hold up. Now hold up. I did get a comment the other day that said Australian got some messed up history, but I ain't know it was gonna be like this. Shout out to the lads. Hold on. Shout out to the lads. Shout out to the lads. Yo, lads, you see my hat? I love this hat. I ain't even gonna sit here and lie to you. First of all, I love hats. Alright, so shout out to the member. Shout out to Meg Z for putting me onto this hat, sending me that great box of Australian stuff. Y'all make sure y'all go get at that video. Now, during my live session when I was unboxing my Australian cultured items, I got a comment, right? And the comment said that Aboriginals were the first to go to Australia. I don't know how true that is. So you click the title, you read the page. It's time we do some Australian history. Shout out to the lads. Doing, mate. Time to get some Australian history.
Spanning size from the Australia, a nation of continent spanning size, from the dazzling coastline to the barren Australian outback, from the northern rainforests to the southern vineyards. But the story of this place goes far beyond its natural landmarks and cosmopolitan cities. Australia has a path that stretches back more than...
Yo lads, where exactly is this? Because like I see this in mad videos, and this looks so beautiful. And like being from New York, like this is giving me New York vibes. Even though your buildings could be a little taller, but we do be doing the most in New York. You know, I gotta say that. So yeah, though, like where is this? This Sydney, right? This Sydney.
65,000 years, shaped by the unique culture of the indigenous peoples, European discovery and colonization, gold rushes.
You see how they say European discovery? You ever notice how, and I don't know, this is just, we're learning together, how most things that were discovered were from Europeans? How do we know that? I'm not saying I'm just saying, it's like, how do we know that? How come everything that ever was discovered is always linked back to Europeans? Just a question.
And the bravery of its soldiers. We are going to take a journey through time, looking at indigenous peoples, European discovery and colonization, gold rushes, and the bravery of its soldiers. We are going to take a journey through time, looking at the main events and transformations that have shaped the Australia we know. Australia's history dates back to long before the first European ships reached its shores. Over 65,000 years ago, the first human inhabitants, the Australian Aborigines, started arriving on this immense continent. The first Australians originated from present-day Indonesia, crossing seas and straits, but the exact circumstances of their journey are still the subject of study and debate. They developed a wide range of cultures, languages, and traditions in this new land.
You see how he said it's still up for debate? Because it's like, how do we really know our history? That's what scares me. I'm going to be honest with you. 31 years old, and it scares me because sometimes I question it. Not everything, but it's like, how do you know your history? Serious question. Because anybody could tell you anything, right?
Adapting perfectly to Australia's varying ecosystems. from the northern rainforests to the inland dry deserts. Spirituality was firmly rooted in the land. Rock formations like Uluru were not only geological landmarks, but also spiritual and cultural centerpieces. The Dreaming, or Chukupra, is a complex mesh of stories, lore, and laws explaining the world's creation and the Aborigines' relationship with the land. The Aborigines successfully developed hunting, fishing, and gathering techniques, guaranteeing their survival despite some of the planet's most challenging conditions. However, Europeans brought with them winds of change and a burgeoning appetite for exploration at
Oh, hold up. Now hold up. I did get a comment the other day that said Australian got some messed up history, but I ain't know it was gonna be like this. I don't like this. This is triggering me because this is reminding me of American history. I don't like it one bit. It's unacceptable, and I think stuff like this is sick. And I said this in a rant, and I don't want to apologize for what I said, but I want to clarify because I think you guys, somebody had misinterpreted what I said and they took what I said as racist. No, I was referring to the racist people. If you are racist, something is wrong with you. You are sick and twisted. Why are you racist? How can you hate somebody because of how they look? There's many things in this world I don't agree with, but I will never hate you for it. I would never look at you less than. I would never call you anything out your... No. That is sick.
the turn of the 17th century. As navigators set sail for uncharted seas, Australia was about to open a new chapter. A Dutch navigator named Willem Jan Zoon, aboard the ship Duifken, or Little Dove, plotted his course across the unexplored seas in 1606 and found himself coming face to face with unknown lands. He was to become the first documented European to set foot in Australia. Jan Zoon and his team set foot on the coast of Cape York Peninsula, in the present-day state of Queensland. They found not the gold or spices that many explorers were looking for, but a land steeped in mystery, inhabited by people who had called it home for millennia. The first encounters between the Europeans and the Aborigines ended up being ambiguous. While some of them were marked by mutual curiosity, others were plagued by strife and violence. Jan Zoon's discovery proved to be just the beginning. In the ensuing decades, other European navigators also ventured into these waters. When Australia was mapped out inch by inch, it became known to the Dutch as New Holland. It would take some time before Europeans started to think of this vast land as more than just a speck on a map. The first recorded European visit to Australia took more than 160 years, dating back to 1770, when Captain James Cook, a resourceful British navigator and cartographer, set sail in his ship, the Endeavour, on a scientific expedition. Cook and his crew headed off into the unknown, and
you notice how, I'm gonna just say the others, you notice how the others had to steal a lot from people because they couldn't be creative enough and think about it themselves, so they had to come and steal other things from other people. And they had to chain certain people because they just were weak-minded. And it must suck to have that in your background, anyone that has a great who was a part that must suck. But that doesn't define you, not at all. That's dumb. It doesn't define you.
Found themselves on the east coast of a wide, uncharted continent. Cook and his crew docked in Botany Bay in April of that year, a spot he chose for the variety of unknown plants that his botanists Sir Joseph Banks and Daniel Solander were able to collect. Cook's journals speak of encounters with Aboriginal peoples, the sheer beauty of the land, and the potential he could see in it. Continuing his journey north on August 22nd, he laid formal claim to the east coast in the name of His Majesty, which he called New South Wales. Although the Dutch were the first...
Oh, New South Wales. Shout out New South Wales. That's some history for yo. I did not know that. Okay, let's get it. See, this is why I do reaction videos and documentaries, because y'all like to see me learn to Australian culture, and I want you guys to see me react to Australian, I'm high, guys, Australian culture, because to me it's really interesting. Like I told you, as I'm an American, so we only really hear about the filth and the disgust of America. We don't hear about the bad stuff, the good stuff in other places. We don't. So this is entertaining to me. So I'm sorry if this content is not for your liking. I'm sorry. This is not for you. But if you like it, sit back, relax, smoke with me, and let's learn together. Let's get it.
First Europeans to reach Australia, they preferred not to claim the land. This was because at the time they already had numerous colonies, several of which had much greater potential for profit than the Australian continent, which meant that the path was clear for English colonization of Australian lands. A fleet of British ships, often referred to as the First Fleet, anchored in Sydney Cove, a natural harbor in the present-day city of Sydney, in 1788. This was not a traditional fleet of settlers looking for fertile land or adventure, but convicts. The decision to transport convicts to Australia was motivated in part by the overcrowding of British jails as a result of the American Revolutionary Wars. Once America became independent, Britain was no longer permitted to send convicts to the American colonies, and Australia appeared.
Shout out to America for gaining their independence. And I did a little brief lesson on my live about why they call America the land of the free. I'm also going to do another video about a documentary so you guys can learn about that, because I was curious, like, why do they call America the land of the free? So drop that comment if you want me to do a video to that, a reaction to it, you know.
As an alternative solution. The New South Wales Penal colony was officially declared on February 7, 1788, by Captain Arthur Phillip, commander of the First Fleet. He had received clear instructions from the British government to establish a penal colony and lay claim to the land in the name of the British Crown. He encountered numerous challenges, including strained relations with the Aboriginal peoples, food shortages caused by poor soil, and insufficient farming experience, as well as trying to maintain order and discipline among the convicts. Over time, more ships arrived bringing supplies, new convicts, and free settlers, despite the difficulties. Other areas along the coast were gradually explored and colonized, extending the British reach in Australia. As the years went by, the notion of Australia as a penal colony developed. New settlements were established, many of which were not penal colonies, and the population grew through immigration and birth. The practice of sending convicts to Australia eventually came to a halt in the 19th century. While the early British colonies were largely concentrated in Australia's coastal regions, the Australian outback became the setting for many of the most challenging expeditions in the country's history. Many explorers, both European and Australian, set out on journeys to survey the heart of Australia during the 18th and 19th centuries. They were prompted by different motives, such as the pursuit of fertile land, viable transportation routes, scientific curiosity, and just plain adventure. These expeditions encountered numerous challenges: vast deserts with water shortages, such as the Simpson Desert, inaccessible mountain ranges such as...
Yo, lads, y'all got a lot of... Okay, so that makes sense then. That explains the wildlife. This all makes sense to me. See, it pays to, learn up on your history.
As the Flinders Ranges, extreme weather ranging from scorching heat to bitter cold, and the sporadic resistance of Aboriginal peoples.
It's given Las Vegas.
Who regarded the intrusion into their ancestral lands with distrust or hostility. Most expeditions were ill-prepared for the harshness of the Australian outback. They lacked adequate supplies, local knowledge, and at times the expertise needed to sail and survive in such challenging environments. The result was a number of expeditions that failed, with explorers lost or killed. These exploration journeys started to fill in the gaps on Australia's maps. They also laid the groundwork for expanding colonization and opening up new transport and communication routes, connecting the interior to the rest of the continent. Australia experienced one of its greatest gold fever outbreaks in the early 1850s. The gold discoveries in New South Wales and soon afterwards Victoria
Shout out New South Wales.
Unleashed a frenzy that would deeply transform the continent, demographically and socioeconomically. The New South Wales Penal colony was officially declared on February 7, 1788, by Captain Arthur Phillip, commander of the First Fleet. He had received clear instructions from the British government to establish a penal colony and lay claim to the land in the name of the British Crown. He encountered numerous challenges, including strained relations with the Aboriginal peoples, food shortages caused by poor soil and insufficient farming experience, as well as trying to maintain order and discipline among the convicts. Over time, more ships arrived bringing supplies, new convicts, and free settlers, despite the difficulties. Other areas along the coast were gradually explored and colonized, extending the British reach in Australia. As the years went by, the notion of Australia as a penal colony developed. New settlements were established, many of which were not penal colonies, and the population grew through immigration and birth. The practice of sending convicts to Australia eventually came to a halt in the 19th century. While the early British colonies were largely concentrated in Australia's coastal regions, the Australian outback became the setting for many of the most challenging expeditions in the country's history. Many explorers, both European and Australian,
The Australian outback, I gotta look that up.
set out on journeys to survey the heart of Australia during the 18th and 19th centuries. They were prompted by different motives, such as the pursuit of fertile land, viable transportation routes, scientific curiosity, and just plain adventure. These expeditions encountered numerous challenges: vast deserts with water shortages, such as the Simpson Desert, inaccessible mountain ranges such as
Yo, all these deserts, that explain y'all wildlife. This all makes sense. It's given Las Vegas, but this makes sense though, because that explains y'all crazy wildlife.
the Flinders Ranges, extreme weather ranging from scorching heat to bitter cold, and the sporadic resistance of Aboriginal peoples, who regarded the intrusion into their ancestral lands with distrust or hostility. Most expeditions were ill prepared for the harshness of the Australian outback. They lacked adequate supplies, local knowledge, and at times the expertise needed to sail and survive in such challenging environments. The result was a number of expeditions that failed, with explorers lost or killed. These exploration journeys started to fill in the gaps on Australia's maps. They also laid the groundwork for expanding colonization and opening up new transport and communication routes, connecting the interior to the rest of the continent. Australia experienced one of its greatest gold fever outbreaks in the early 1850s. The gold discoveries in New
That must have been a great time in Australia. Good times.
South Wales and soon afterwards Victoria unleashed a frenzy that would deeply transform the continent, demographically and socioeconomically. Word of these discoveries spread quickly, luring tens of thousands of people, both from the continent itself and from as far away as China, North America, and Europe. The ensuing immigration wave had a huge impact. Australia's population more than tripled in just a few years. Cities like Melbourne grew exponentially.
Shout out Melbourne. Well, he said Melbourne. But I thought it's Melbourne. Shout out Melbourne.
With infrastructure and services rapidly being developed to cater for the growing population. Makeshift settlements littered the landscape as people dug and sifted in search of their fortune. But the gold rush also introduced tensions and challenges. Competing for land and wealth often ended in conflict. Miners' rights turned into a significant political issue, leading to the famous Eureka Rebellion in 1854 in Ballarat. The uprising resisted unfair license fees and the alleged corruption of the authorities. Despite having been quickly suppressed, many see it as a crucial moment in Australia's progress towards democracy. A large population of Chinese miners, enticed by the prospect of wealth, also led to racial tensions. Many encountered discrimination and hostility, and on some occasions, this escalated into outright violence. Throughout the second half of the 19th century, the Australian continent was split into several independent British colonies, each with its own government and legislative system. As they neared the end of the century, numerous practical and ideological questions began to emerge, highlighting the need for greater unification. An Australian national identity started to gain momentum. While still loyal to the British Crown, many Australians started to see themselves as a distinct people, with common interests and aspirations. Creating one unified nation would assert this emerging identity. Eventually, On January 1st, 1901, the Federation of Australia was proclaimed.
Shout out Australia. Shout out to the lads.
The 6 colonies became 6 states of a unified nation under a shared constitution. Sir Edmund Barton was appointed
Oh, so y'all have 6 states. Like how we got 50 plus. And I say 50 plus because let me tell you something. America, in 8 states, when I went to school, it was 30. I mean, I said it was 30. It was never 30. When I went to school, it was 50. Well, no, I'm sure at one point it was 30. But when I went to school, it was 50. Now it's like 50. I just say 50 plus because, girl, I don't know. But you guys have 6. Like, how much states y'all got? Yo, that's fire. Yo, that's dope. Yo, you learn something new every day. I'm excited to learn.
Australia's first Prime Minister. The new nation kept its status as a British Crown colony. But over time, and with different legislation and agreements, Australia gradually gained more autonomy until it became fully sovereign. As World War ship are still revered in Australia today, World War I had a profound impact on Australia as a whole. More than 60,000 Australians were killed, and many more were injured or otherwise traumatized. But it would not be long before the Second World War broke out and Australia...
That's some messed up history, and it's kind of triggering. Like, this is really reminding me of some American history. Like, no funny shit. Like, we really just come from some messed up places, and it's not our fault, you know, but it's just like the history is just messed up, bro. And then it sucks because, like, no one, like the civilians, like us, we all lose. And it ain't got nothing to do with us. Has nothing to do with us. It's because the higher ups couldn't get it together, and now we're here. Well, that's how it is now. Back then, it was more like just of a, like an ego thing, and let's take over land and this, that, and the third. But it's like now the innocents have to deal with it. Sucks.
Australia again pledged its support to
the people out of all them airplanes. I mean, may they rest in peace. That's very unfortunate. But that's like interesting. I you know, like, thank God it was such a low number, but still a high number. But I don't know. I'm thinking about like what happened in 9/11. Like, that was a lot of people. I'm sure the number was triple that, you know? Like, oh my goodness. And it's like just innocent people that got nothing to do with nothing. They're just minding their business.
This was Japanese forces. Australian soldiers were fundamental in decisive battles such as Kokoda, Bunagona, and Bougainville. Australia's relationship with the United States grew significantly stronger throughout this period.
Yeah, lads. Yeah.
While Australia had historically turned to Britain for defense and support assurances, the Pacific threat and the heavy presence of American forces in the region shifted this dynamic. American military bases were established on Australian soil, and General Douglas MacArthur, commander of the Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific, was based in Brisbane for a time. Australia came out of the war with a new understanding of its standing in the world. The traditional dependence on Great Britain started to wane. But there was still an open wound in Australian society. Ever since the arrival of the first British settlers in 1788, Australia's Indigenous peoples had experienced discrimination, forced displacement, and, in many cases, downright violence. Their lands were taken, their customs and languages frequently suppressed, and their rights as citizens denied or restricted. Despite the establishment of the Commonwealth of Australia in 1901, many pieces of state and federal legislation still marginalized and discriminated against Aboriginal people. But the 60s and 70s brought about a major change, partly inspired by the civil rights movements in the United States and a global decolonization. Aboriginal activists and their allies started calling for justice and equality. The other critical issue that gained prominence at this time was that of stolen children, Indigenous minors who were forcibly removed from their families and communities, then put under the care of white institutions or families.
Oh, hell no, Australia. Australia, you are pissing me off. What? This is triggering. This is reminding me of some American history right here. Wow.
As part of an assimilation attempt. The government started to address these pressures in the 1970s. Harsh discriminatory policies were revoked, and there was a growing recognition of Aboriginal land rights. But the fight for justice and true reconciliation continues to this day. Australia underwent an economic revolution in the 1980s. Before that decade, its economy was largely defined by high taxes, strict regulations, and a heavy reliance on traditional sectors, such as agriculture and mining. But while recognizing the need to compete on the global stage more effectively and to diversify its economy, the government embarked on radical reforms. Over the following decades, the benefits of these reforms became more apparent. The Australian economy started to diversify, with industries such as services, education, and tourism all playing increasingly vital roles. Australia also started to establish stronger economic ties with Asia, especially with China, which was to become its main trading partner. In the 1980s, Australia's economic makeover opened the door to a period of unparalleled growth and diversification.
That looks beautiful. Beautiful. Wow, beautiful, beautiful, lads, beautiful.
Now the country is not only a Pacific economic powerhouse, but also an influential player on the global economic stage. Ranging from the early Aboriginal days to its discovery, its stint as a penal colony, and eventually its emergence as a prosperous and influential nation on the world stage, Australia's trajectory is an example of endurance and transformation.
Wow, lads, man, that's some history for you right there, man. I mean, drop a comment. I just gotta say, it reminds me of a lot of American history, and I don't like the war. I just would never like that. I feel like governments need to get it together. And it's just lack of communication. I don't know what it is, but we just all gotta understand each other, and we gotta definitely get it in our heads that this don't even belong to us. This is all God. So y'all subscribe for the vibe. Hope you learned something today.